I'm probably gonna come in on like Saturday or Sunday, just for the 2 hours. It's like they said, like you only need to give it 2 hours. I'm not like all too worried though. Cause, like, I have, like,
Oh yeah, it's like it was kind of like and then like okay, this is like this is the work. Yeah,
it's such a weird place to like it's already like something
the way on TV or the site, I thought we were doing it. Yeah, makes sense.
like it's
Yeah, it's like that. What? No. Oh, so I have one of those too.
two identical sticks. You need to fuck down. You need to fuck down. It's the cheapest one. It's still cheapest.
I also need food. It's closed. It's closed at 3. And they also stopped service always at 2 the other day. Super. I was busy finishing up my classes. I had If you want to give me one. Thank you. Huh? No.
On incremental development, if you're interested, and there's also printouts from Dan Froelich on missing middle housing. They're out on this table out here. So if anyone would like to hand out, that's the missing middle, please feel free to take one. Our third speaker today is another one of our people. We're happy for, take note, guys. You're here, you're in, you're stuck with us. You're going to keep coming back. You're going to get, once you get your claws in you, shackles, you say, you can't get away from us. We're going to keep calling them. So Kathy Schuth, following her graduation in 1999, had moved to Pittsburgh, worked for an architecture firm before moving back to South Bend in 2007, where she continued at local architecture firms, two of which will be familiar to architecture students, Duncan was architect and Alliance Architects. Became a member of the board of the Near Northwest Neighborhood, Inc., which is a community development corporation that works in the Near Northwest Neighborhood here in South Bend. We've driven to the airport or in Diamond. We've driven through her neighborhood and seen some of the amazing work she's has her fingers in. In 2015, she became the NNN's executive director, a role in which she's responsible for managing personnel, consultants, fundraising, budgeting, planning, and the implementation of all neighborhood development activities and business operations of the NNN. Welcome back.
I have to say this is a lot of fun, and also it's fun to move from these pictures of firms that are working nationally, developers that are working on really large scale projects, and then to come at you with a presentation that is local upon local. I mean, that we're mostly going to be talking about single family development in this one neighborhood in this city, South Bend, Indiana. I did not grow up here. My first time here was as an undergrad student at University Notre Dame, but I grew up in a small town in southern Indiana, in Bedford, Indiana. And this type of, I would say, kind of American city typology is kind of in my own background. I've become lucky in my circle. The architecture firm I worked in Pittsburgh was Urban Design Associates, and we worked nationally on these types of large-scale projects. And I got to be basically an urban design consultant at a very young age, straight out of school, and to do that for 3 years. And out of that, realized that, in a sense, what Dean Lukudich had said, that there was a sense of I needed to come home at a certain point and not travel the country, and to not be, in a sense, a design expert at the age of 24, and see what it meant to become a licensed architect, and see what it meant to really dig into these issues on the place building scale in my own neighborhood. So this is actually my own neighborhood. This is the shortest commute I may ever have. I live a block away from the office. This is my office, and there are 5 apartment units in it. There are 2 community spaces, and as well as our offices, we have 4 employees here. We have myself. I'm a registered architect. The previous directors have not been. There's a previous director sitting in the second row, Todd Tiger, who's now with Indiana Landmarks, who developed this building. So we have a property development specialist who works specifically on single family housing. And then we have just this year a community organizer that we call a neighborhood networker. And you can see how that fits into our mission. So our mission is geographically based. We're a neighborhood-based community development corporation. I mean, we're a nonprofit working in community development. We're able to access things like federal funding, community development block grants, home funds, and work on federally subsidized housing projects. In this case, we're specifically looking to stabilize the Near Northwest neighborhood in South Bend, Indiana, by providing affordable housing, organizing the residents in the Near Northwest neighborhood, and then promoting the neighborhood's interests within the wider community. So definitely advocates on many levels within the wider community. I'm going to shift the conversation a little bit. This, in a sense, flips the conversation because I want to ask a question such as this. And to talk about, because we're talking about market-based issues, so I think we have to flip it. And I'm going to go through this really quick, but I think it's worth asking ourselves questions as architects and community members, such as, is decent housing a right? And we all know that the destruction of housing influences every other aspect of life. So should your apartment, dorm room, house burn down tonight, everything is thrown on its head, right? You're not going to be in class the next day. You're not going to be knowing what to do next. And financially, you may or may not be ready for that. Well, that's a pretty extreme example of an outside influence impacting housing. We know that there are lots of examples of other influences. Just to let you know, internationally, when you're talking about decent, affordable housing as a right, it's pretty recognized through human rights treaties that housing is a recognized right. And there are a lot, I'm not going to go through this, but the Universal Declaration of Human Rights talks about it. Just kind of, when we're talking about the international sphere, lots of countries have recognized that, along with healthcare, along with other things, that housing itself is one of the most stabilizing needs and rights of human beings. Well, that's not an American thing necessarily. Constitutionally, we don't protect that right. And so I think the question I just want to plug in your head is, if housing may or may not be a human right, or is it a market-driven opportunity? And I think that becomes important here and lays the groundwork for most American housing questions, in my opinion, but specifically when we're talking about areas like South Bend. So I'm leading you into the sense that your Northwest neighborhood is a pretty devastated, weak market, vacant and abandoned type problem neighborhood. So this question leads it, like, are you only allowed to have housing if you are responsible, basically if you have enough money to afford constant rent or constant mortgage? And also, is decent housing a human right only if the housing market is stable? So if we're starting to look at areas where there are weak market problems, where the housing market in a sense has bust, then where does that leave us then as both housing providers and as kind of community-minded members, and frankly as community developers or private developers? And so I just also wanted to touch briefly, for those of you who may not know, just saying, is asking if decent housing is a problem in South Bend, and specifically affordable housing, is that to add on to poverty, the United Way has done recent studies, and I think this is very helpful, that they've looked at families and singles that are asset limited, income restrained, and employed. So these are folks with jobs that don't earn enough money basically to cover basic living costs. So this isn't about the unemployed or those living in poverty, but it's basically this gap between what people are earning and what can actually be afforded to live in a space. So you just to put some numbers in front of you, poverty levels considered, if you're a single person, 11,000 or under, your family of four, $23,000 in under per. So that's really low, of course, on the poverty line. The survival budget in St. Joseph County, as determined by the United Way in this report, is a little higher than that, $18,000 for a single person and $46,000 for a family of four. So just to throw a few other numbers in front of you, 30% of the houses of the families in this county fall in that category of either impoverished or in the ALICE numbers, in these employed but not quite meeting it. So this is more than just like going month to month. This means you're often transitional housing. You're often having to really scrape by, borrow things, couch surf with your friends and family, really unstable situations. And so then you can see here kind of what this means. So you can see housing for a single adult is determined kind of the survival level, $534 a month, and those costs include utilities. So you're not likely going to find a great apartment for $534, especially not one that wouldn't include utilities. So I'm just going to let that kind of wash over you as we go by and say that, yes, we also know that about 30%, well, yeah, 27% of households in St. Joseph County spend more than 30% on housing, and that's the standard usually for what folks are determining what families should be spending on housing is kind of the cap of what should be allowed. So housing cost burden is the most common housing problem in St. Joseph County, even as our housing costs are quite low. So I thought it's worth mentioning as we talk nationally, that housing affordability, we're talking about housing affordability as an issue is quite different in many different places. So I threw up a little image here for San Francisco, and I'm sure that Dan can talk to us a lot about affordable housing in San Francisco, and I don't want you to focus on it too much, but as far as when we talk about what's going on in Colorado, in California, and we're talking about lack of affordable housing and whether or not it should be included in development projects, in South Bend, we're really talking about kind of opposite end, like levels, where it's more like we have a lot of housing, not a lot of it is decent, and a lot of it is still not affordable. So decent and affordable housing is actually can be hard to come by. I thought we could show a few just localized issues. Housing isn't that expensive here in South Bend. However, we've got a couple of nice examples nearby of kind of localized strong market issues happening on Notre Dame Avenue in the Northeast neighborhood as housing has been built there, and I've seen that you've gotten that's been generated. So you can see, I'm sure there's a little pointer on here, but I don't think I need it. And you can see that this house is for sale for about $600,000 just south of the university, on the east side of the river. Your Northwest neighborhood is that area just to the west side of the river. And here's a house, lovely house for sale there for $40,000. Now I will tell you that actually isn't the loveliest house in that neighborhood, so that's to be fair. But the truth is, if you're looking at a market in a neighborhood that's supporting $40,000, that's going to be a very difficult place for any developer to develop and to do it in such a way that they make money. So that's sort of the basic tenet of where we are as community developers, is to say, how do we handle a weak market or broken market area and system? So that, how do we provide stabilization in areas where the market isn't producing return on investment? And so I thought, maybe Dan Murphy would appreciate this for any of his development too. It's like, well, you gotta sleep on one. You gotta do it carefully, and you really have to be smart. And we're all working on this together as a community, and I know that there's some community partners here, so I think that's another way to do it. We're gonna have to be smart both on every end, and architecture really has a place in thinking through this. So to show you a little bit what we're doing, is that of course back to our mission. Most of our programs are coming through federal funded programs, and we have a strong single family rehab and new construction program. We don't hold on to them. We do have a few rentals, but mostly we're selling them, and we're able to take a loss on them because it's a federally subsidized program. So we overspend basically, and then the low income qualified homeowner reaps the benefit of what we're doing, and the federal government subsidizes the difference. So this is where New Northwest neighborhood is over in the turquoise area. You can see you can kind of easily see the golf course of Notre Dame nearby. New Northwest neighborhood is about 1.5 miles really from campus, so very close on the other side of the river, and it's a lovely neighborhood. And when I describe it, even as executive director, as a neighbor, I say it's the best neighborhood in the city, and it's also in some ways the worst neighborhood in the city. So when I'm working on housing work and going for grant writing and needing funds to help stabilize it, is the worst neighborhood in the city. But living in it, it is the best neighborhood in the city, and the diversity and interests in community organizing, and frankly, just pure community and neighborliness, these are commodities that cannot be quantified, and everybody is looking for them. So it's actually becoming a more interesting neighborhood to many families moving into the neighborhood, and often we have families that move into outlying neighborhoods and areas that later are really disappointed that their realtors didn't point them to a diverse, walkable, connected neighborhood such as the New Northwest neighborhood. So who's there? We have about 3,600 neighbors there. It involves 3 historic districts. This is all by Leaper Park and Memorial Hospital. It's a diverse area over those 2 sets of tracks. It's about 55% white, 40% black. And then specifically west of Portage is where we focus a lot of our work because it has high rates of poverty, vacant housing. But of course, it's also got lots of people, and none of that is determined by class, income, race, any of those things. So we have a thriving community into which we're always trying to plug in new families. So this is an aerial view with the Google map. One of the historic districts. This is Chapin Park, and I wanted to show you kind of how rich heritage of the single family walkable, regular block. Street is, it's the river right up in the upper right hand corner of Leaper Park. Right up there. And then as you get to the far left side is Portage Avenue, which is sort of a divider. And then this is an aerial shot of what's going on across that divider, is that you've got areas that have been flooded, large amounts of vacant or abandoned properties. And then I'm going to talk about it very briefly a little bit. Kind of a current target of city programs, like there are 1,000 houses in 1,000 days, which removed approximately 600 houses from the city, now to 100 of those are in this neighborhood. So needless to say, if the city's removing 600 houses and only 100 are in our neighborhood, we're also not the only neighborhood like this. We're also involved in some other issues locally, and I would mention that there are complications to what does exist in these historic districts, as well as what we're dealing with in general in urban environments. But to flash forward, I'm pretty proud of our housing and what we're able to do. We're really able to go through and take existing houses and do the full rehab, which become beacons of kind of light and hope for the community, but also when neighbors see this, they get really excited because they know that a new family or new neighbor is going to move in that is interested in community. That's interesting in itself. These are all low income buyers, but the ones that come to the near Northwest neighborhood are 100% interested in being there because of the strong community that is formed, as well as the housing value that they see. So we tend to have a wait list for our houses. And it goes really well. A few before and after. These are on Portage Avenue. Just to show you kind of what is fun as architects, because I know you see that left hand before, and you understand the after. So it's been really fulfilling that I get to see that process through. And this was one that we did last year. This is right on Portage Avenue, and this was an eyesore and a difficult rental on a very public street for many, many years. Was on the demolition list, and we were able to remove it from the demolition list and totally transform it. And Hispanic families moved into it as an immigrant family and love it, and just love it. So of course, is that transformational? That's absolutely. That's transformational, and it's not just on the building edge; it is on the people edge. And I'll show you pictures of the building. However, we recognize that transformation impacts about a 3-block radius, as far as we can give numbers back to HUD saying we impacted one family, but the truth is that we're impacting multiple families and the entire perception of the neighborhood, especially when you do a house like that in the corridor. So here's a few others we found in the last few years. You see, pretty simple, as far as the form is already there. Things have been resided on these old Victorian homes. Porches have been changed out, or just kind of wrought iron stuff and shutters, and there's a very simple kind of hardy board siding forms that we're doing. And then on the interior too, these are really pretty homes. Almost all of them are hardwood floors, wood trim. And we're able to do the spit polish or remove and replace trim work if we need to, replace kitchens, bath, kind of a whole bit. So these home buyers are really getting a full package, kind of new, totally rehab in what is a shell of an old home in the bedroom. These are pretty typical. And then I thought I'd show off the basement too, because I actually think it's important. I think we spend way too much money on basements sometimes when I'm looking at the bottom line. But the fact is that this is hugely important to the house. We fix the foundation, so we deal with water problems. And most of the basements and housing in this neighborhood is all started at 1890, finished by 1920, so it's all about 100 years old. And they mostly had what they call these Michigan basements. They didn't actually dig out to the 4 corners of the footprint of the house, but they're all kind of these roundy brick structures. And then, of course, for our low-income families, we find it extremely important to have a new furnace, to have new water heater, to have new plumbing, to have new electrical. So you might want to put a lot of money into this rehab. And we're able to do that simply because we have the federal funds to do it. So just so you know what that means, to purchase one of these great homes, then you have to income qualify. So this is a low, moderate income program. And what that means is that we get guidelines from HUD every year that gives the maximum based on the county area median income of what your income can be. And they hold it to the penny But if I can prove that you earn less than however many people you have in your household in this number, then you are eligible to purchase one of the homes. That means our families tend to be in a sweet spot of, frankly, I would say the best candidates for our homes tend to earn within $2,000 of these ranges. That means they can afford a mortgage because they're purchasing a home. They may work with the city to get kind of a down payment assistance program, that sort of thing. There are programs that they can also layer on top of it. There's a great one the city provides that allows 20% off the mortgage. But I would say kind of that sweet spot, you're really already looking for somebody who has some financial stability, ready to purchase a home, and earns really close to that maximum. So I just wanted to talk about these things as we think, even on a single family level, of what does it mean, what are our community challenges, and really, there's a lot of people working in the city on these issues, and how do we develop new or improved housing in this current weak market area, and how do we do that without displacement? I mean, that's kind of the secondary question, which we're all asking ourselves. So just as far as, kind of those pure numbers, and these are really low numbers when we're talking about development, especially compared to nationally. The cost is the #1 barrier to working in a weak market area, of course. So if you estimate that you could build a house for $180,000 to $200,000, and that's really quite a modest house, very not fancy. In a weak market area, a house like that would have a list price of about $120,000. So the basic math is a barrier to the entire community right now, and saying we're interested in developing in these areas. However, we're never going to develop. We're interested in $60,000 per house. And so we find, as a community development corporation, we're learning what is our role then in helping stabilize that market, to try to turn that tide, and how to keep it from turning too quickly so that you don't go from $40,000 houses to $600,000 houses. And these are very interesting challenges, and we're starting to get some interest in small development, all these things have been from folks like Mike Keene, who's also a neighbor, is starting to think about these middle ground developers who are willing to take different risks and learning to work together to do that. So quality, I would say, is the #2 limitation. Like when you have to build at the minimum for affordable housing, you have to ask yourself, like, well, what do you want to build? What's actually attractive? What's going to last? If you've probably all been in houses that you thought felt cheap. You've probably been in buildings that you thought felt cheap, and you know the difference. And it looks bad, they feel bad. And what was the quote earlier is that they're going to fall apart right before the mortgage amortizes. So these are questions that we're asking a lot, and I wanted to just point out a few things that we've got. Even for our federal budgets, we have a current cap for like a new housing construction budget at $220,000. That's supposed to include acquisition of the land, the site work, any tapping we'd have to do with water tap, the construction, developer fees, the whole shebang. So really tight. And frankly, this is a local policy cap on federal funding, and the way the local policy works right now, it discourages the use of private loans to access additional funding. So I see this as, like for right now, I would say local CDCs are trying to work with the city to say, like we can do this differently and in other ways. Even as the city is saying, how do we cap the amount of money that is spent on these projects? And so we're kind of all working from different directions on that. I also wanted to show you, so when the NNN, gosh, I would have said about 12 years ago, started building new construction, this is what it came up with local builders. I'm not real excited about this, even though it's 3 doors down from where I live. But this is pretty standard, right? Like this is the home builder's response to a traditional looking house. And so this is kind of what we had to work with at the time. We've got 2 of these in the neighborhood, and neighbors really complained. They saw it. They knew immediately. They're like, hey, we saw all those other houses you were doing, all those rehabs that you were doing of beautiful homes, and they don't compare anything to what's going on with this new construction. Mostly we haven't done a lot of new construction since, but I am proud to say that we had some Notre Dame students design this one for us, and I think they did a better job. Same builder. No, it's not the same builder, actually. That's right, this is builder's under, actually. But and this builder is still talking to us, enjoyed the project, and really wants to work with us further. which is really good. And I'm proud to say that right now we're working with Marianne on some potential new construction in the neighborhood. And if you thought the Notre Dame students were good, really quite good. And is working with us very much on this real world challenge of how do you do, in this case, like about a 1,600 square foot house for the budget that I just showed you, and have it look like an actual great house that fits into the context of the neighborhood and doesn't have to chintz on all the materials. So this is a big challenge and a real challenge, and we're going to be facing over the next year how many kind of value engineering decisions we're going to have to make on that as we push the limits. And so far we have a builder that is willing to say things like, I'm going to chip in a little, I know what you're doing, I understand it, and we're also hoping to do 3 this year, so hopefully having a little bit of volume will help too, so that we're not just doing 1. And then without displacement, I think these are big questions, and I'm not even sure that we want to get into any of this too much. But it is a question as far as how can you stabilize a neighborhood in a place without displacement of what they're using. So this is the Triangle neighborhood here, Eddy Street Common. And frankly, it's beautiful. And it's really beautiful, but it did replace an entire neighborhood. And I would say most of that neighborhood was already gone. On the other hand, we see what's happening in the New York. It's a little uncomfortable right now. We're letting large houses being put up next to 1-story houses that are clearly still lower income homeowners and renters. And it's becoming an issue. And I know that neighbors in our neighborhood, when they talk about housing development, they're quite nervous about this. And saying, you really just don't want us here, do you? You really want to make this a better place, but that doesn't involve us. And so I think for all of us, it's a question, especially for a neighborhood-based group, is to say, can we redevelop with instead of for? And these are challenges that I hope that I can answer, and we're still working on it. I'm going to talk about two local programs quickly, just to give you some context. It's also what's going on citywide. Is that the city, I think starting, was it 2013? I'm looking at Liz because she's a city planner. And she worked on this heavily. But in 2013, came up with the mayor's initiative, 1,000 houses in 1,000 days, which came on the tail end of doing a vacant innovative property initiative. It was a city effort to work on this. It was not 1,000 demolitions in 1,000 days. It, in fact, kind of looked at everything that can be done to repair, deconstruct or demolish, kind of like anything we could do to impact the large number of vacant abandoned houses. That number of vacant abandoned houses had very much increased after the Great Recession, 2006, 2007, 2008, with mortgage problems and foreclosures that were happening in weak market areas such as the west half of the New Northwest neighborhood. That often meant a number of investors simply walking away from their property. That they stopped renting them, they stopped working on them, and kind of disappeared from face of earth. A lot of these properties were already on the edge as far as maintenance goes. And I have to say I have some mixed feelings about the number of demolitions. Neighbors, for the most part, see them as very positive. I have some mixed feelings because I've got mixed feelings as an architect, and you saw what can be done with the resource of the house that remains. I also think environmentally it's a huge thing to push any of these houses basically into the landfill. And so that's a nuanced opinion of it. But as far as like what it means to live on a block with blighted and vacant houses, I would say neighbors almost 100% are very encouraged and see improvement from a blighted house being removed from the street. There were a few houses deconstructed that really hasn't caught traction financially here. It makes much sense. And then there were some houses fully renovated so that the New Northwest neighborhood would be included in some of the 6 CDC partner houses. And you can see that they exceeded the goal of 1,000 homes. So that's great. They impacted 1,122 properties. There's been some, the second program I talked about, well, here's just an example, kind of what would be typically left. I mean, really, we're left with neighborhoods full of vacant lots. And this one is from New Northwest neighborhood. And you can kind of see this is the condition of many of the blocks in our neighborhood. There's some other things going on that I just threw in here too, just as ideas and things that are happening. If you haven't heard, South End Mutual Homes built a co-op property and got 24, this local developer collected 24 of these properties or similar properties and put together a housing co-op program, also affordable housing. So that's been very interesting. Thank you, so great opening for that. And all their architectural stack. And then I just wanted to give a little grassroots feedback because now what's happening is that we have local political grassroots efforts from especially West Side neighborhoods in the city saying, all right, now what? You've demolished 600 homes. You've got this big initiative. We've got empty teeth on our blocks. We have, like we basically cleared the path. So what did we clear it for? And the city is working to put together an answer, but it's a grassroots group initiated by a local developer as well as one of the city council has put together this response and said, all right, we're incentivizing housing and development downtown. We're really trying to build the urban core here in South Bend. What are we doing in neighborhoods, especially to address this gap that I just spoke of in funding? So this kind of, I would say, very bold proposal has gone to the city from this group of people saying, would the city itself take this outside of the hands of the federal government? Would the city itself provide financial incentives for new construction in these neighborhoods? Would it work in neighborhood chosen target areas, so that areas that neighborhoods choose themselves? And then as soon as they started talking about that, some really good hands got raised, and neighbors said, look, I've invested in this neighborhood for 40 years, meaning I've lived in it. My housing values haven't gone up. I can't get any help on the repairs I need for my house, nor can I get equity on my house to do it. And so very quickly they started talking about how do we add home repair programs to basically to work with also existing homeowners that have invested in the neighborhoods for a long time. This is one of the meetings, and again, it's I would say it's not a super well organized group, and also has multiple agendas. And that's very common for a grassroots group. On the other hand, you have a very good message and a very good question to the city. Here is just kind of an image that I found from last year, just showing kind of like residential tax breaks and tax abatement and where that's gone. And you can see that mostly it's gone in the subdivisions that fall outside of the city and has not been taken much advantage of within the city limits. And also, just to show a reminder of kind of all the things that have been happening downtown. Started lots of residential development, lots of apartment development, and there have been lots of city subsidies in many ways for this development. And I would say it's needed. So I'm anti this, but it's kind of, I'm also understand when neighbors are saying, okay, now the rest of us, we've lived here for a long time, we're not as interested in the new people that are living here. So that's what happens when you live in an area a while, right? Like you start saying, well, what about me? What about my neighborhood? I love it. And then this is something that becomes important in city development when they're trying to finance things, TIF districts, which are tax increment districts where they're able to put boundaries on things and collect increased property taxes after development happens and pour it back into the infrastructure of those districts. So that becomes important. I don't know if I think that was your slide, right? And that becomes important just to show you that South Bend has large amounts of TIF districts, most of which do not cover residential areas. So when we're talking about single family development, that often it can be difficult to tap into those funds for areas of residential development. That's changing and shifting, and it does cover mostly the downtown area. But I would say we can kind of see a lot of the holes on the west side in the same neighborhoods that are seeking residential development. Now, I want to say, just to kind of give you the quick update, in 2018, the city has proposed $1 million for neighborhood development and $300,000 for homeowner repair. I see this as a direct response to the grassroots question. And the city has said, we're willing to meet in part way. We're going to probably find a different solution than what you proposed. And they're in the process right now of meeting with financial institutions and community development groups and realtors and builders and others to say, okay, what is an answer that we can use to start doing this? So I say it's a start, but it really kind of brings you as architecture students and professors into kind of like our day-to-day community question, I would say, in neighborhood development, tying right into what McKee is doing, of course, too, and talking about small incremental development, and also the right question to start talking about is missing middle housing and all the vacant land. So this is also a possibility. I thought I'd throw this in here. We don't know what will happen in the future. This is actually from 1919 when these houses were built. Where they thought a canal would be come through South Bend and connect us to Lake Michigan, and we would become the seaport city. So we don't always know what will happen. But I hope this has been helpful to kind of draw you into some of the complexities of weak market issues and also single family housing. Thank you very much.
How much was the cost of the house that you showed?
Sure, one of the rehabs or the new rehab?
Yeah, some of the ones that you showed.
I was
really cool one, triangular lot.
Yeah, that was the purple one that we were looking at. The total cost of that probably ended up being $210,000, including acquisition. We sold it for $75,000, which is market value. A lot of people think that we sell our houses for under market value, that is the deal that we are giving residents. But in fact, we're selling it at full market value, gives them appraised and sell at market value. And you can see when they're adjacent to houses that are selling for $25,000 or $40,000, we're actually kind of doubling that, but it's got a long way to go. So we lose a lot of, I would say we don't lose a lot of the house. And just so you know, if there's like a community development corporation, we're able to operate as a nonprofit on donations. We also earn developer fees for doing this work. And so we earn a percentage of the project. It's not a reason for me to try to cost the project, I'd like to do this project. But that is how we're able to do it. Yes.
I have a question regarding to the vacant lots. So I know that there's a student group partnering with Creek working on this project called the vacant lot optimization. So so basically this project it's working with a company called S3. They're building this website to incorporate the neighborhood to collect feedback from all the vacant lots in the southeast neighborhood.
Yeah.
So I was wondering what do you think would be the best solution other than the website that would kind of incorporate the neighbors into how we're solving this vacant lot problem?
It's a great question, and to summarize it, you mentioned the Bowman Creek initiative, where there's a group of students and others working in the southeast neighborhood, and they're doing some really interesting things, especially on sustainability and rain gardens and things like that, and trying to daylight Bowman Creek, which has been buried under blocks of the city. One of the initiatives that they have is vacant land initiatives that we call it. But I know where they're trying to basically ask neighbors and adjacent landowners what they think is the highest and best value use of these vacant lots that we're having would be. And I would say one of the things that I guess I get a little frustrated by is that I love community gardens and I love rain gardens, but there's only so many I think can happen in an urban environment, especially when they're in random locations all throughout a neighborhood, because these houses are being torn down in very random locations. So I think really the thing that we should be focusing on, I'm hoping that we can focus on in the city, would be neighborhood planning, would be neighborhood master planning on kind of either a block by block basis if that's necessary, but even in these targeted areas where I think it's going to be necessary to say, how can we use these in tandem? So perhaps you have rain gardens on 5 blocks, but you pick them specifically to work within a wider environment that would also include other things that may also include higher density projects that could, like the simple stuff is to attach a vacant lot next to an adjacent house. And so there's a lot of I would say there are a lot of residents that want to de-densify the neighborhoods, as there are others that want to add density to the neighborhood. So you both have kind of landlocked houses that want a garden, and we have opportunities for lots of infill construction. Yes.
You guys do a lot of reviving of houses in the neighborhood. In what way do you prioritize where you do the specific projects? Because it is a large neighborhood. I guess that's my question.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I had a neighbor once tell me, he said, you are working in an opportunity-rich environment. That's exactly right. So prioritizing is a huge component of what we're doing, and I would say the board of the CDC, as well as kind of neighbor-driven response to this, has said community builds not just from the structure of the building. So the community means if you're putting a new house, a new neighbor, a new family into this kind of environment, you don't want to parachute them into a very perilous condition. So we're not working right now with one house on a block that has a lot of vacant and problematic properties. We tend to build in target areas and have strength build off of strength. For instance, we're kind of moving incrementally from one place to another. Sometimes we're able to work on one house on one block, but that means the rest of that block is fairly stable in a sense that there's also neighbors, I would say, the social infrastructure to carry the revitalization of the neighborhood through that house and neighbor. We're approaching now the need to look at, for certain areas of the neighborhood, for larger scale projects, because we simply can't sustain. And I would say, like, we're able to do usually only 4 to 6 houses a year. And we've done 100 of them over 20 years. So that's a big impact in a neighborhood, but it's slow, it's really slow. And so if I'm looking at 4 to 5 houses, I often can't line them up on a single block too effectively. And we're starting to see this need that we really need to work with other partners so that we can push into areas and kind of do a blitz so that we're able to kind of continue to stabilize. The short answer is to say we work in targeted areas and we build strengths up. Thank you.
Just about an hour left, and I'd like to start the panel with one guided question, and I suspect that's all we're going to do. And then open it up to the audience as well. We've been talking a lot at you and limiting questions, but we'd like this to be as much of a dialogue as possible because it really does take the bigger conversation. So my question is to the panel, and whoever wants to jump in and start, go ahead. We've seen a huge range of scale today, which is one of the reasons why we chose this collection of people, because it takes the community lot by lot. It takes the city looking at a code and then working with these big, developers, the volume home builders. It takes the developer that's going to come in and make, really be able to invest in a large scale. So with this, at the same time, because we've covered so much, we both wanted to do that. But then, what is for the audience, being students, mostly architecture? I'm not sure if we have any more, because probably anyone else who's joined us, but mostly architecture students. How do they engage in this? What would you say is the key message that you would like them to leave with after 4 hours of this housing unit? What is going to help them in their career to go out and be a meaningful part of this conversation? Can I start? I'm just warmed up, so
But I think when we talked to Professor Casado about what she wanted us to talk about today, she talked about art and building and policy. And I know when I was a student, we talked a lot about art and building. We did not talk a lot about policy. And so I think that that's okay. And in some sense, policy, even though there are national trends and national things that impact everything. Often very localized things on policy level that impact everything that you're going to do. And I think you're hearing it here, and it's probably part of the reason why this university is starting to talk about Institute for Real Estate, is to say driving factors of architecture are very much market and policy. I think that that's an important thing to know as a student, because you're not going to be invited to build into areas where there's not a market very often, unless you run a nonprofit. And you're not going to be able to do what you want to do or even can envision unless the right policies are in place, including zoning. Frankly, I sit on the book board of zoning here. So definitely things you didn't think that you would be doing in architecture school, writing zoning code, or kind of enforcing it locally and trying to change it from the inside out. I guess that would be my answer, is to say, maybe it's a paraphrase, Dan Murphy, buckle up. And this is going to be coming. It's going to influence everything you do as a
I think the one message to me that sort of covered all the presentations was the growing interest and need for urbanism, and the fact that everybody who wants to live in these walkable neighborhoods deserves the opportunity to live in them. And so that's what I really appreciate about Kathy's presentation, and it's inherent in a lot of the work we do with our public sector clients, is that I think you all are in a really fortunate position, because when I graduated in the mid-90s and then started my practice in 99, we were pioneers trying to convince cities that they needed urbanism, and we were trying to convince them to sort of have an urban policy. But now, because the market wasn't as strong then for urbanism, but post-recession, the market responded faster than anyone ever imagined to urbanism. And so now the bigger challenge is the folks who lived there who are getting pushed out. And so this whole equity conversation, to me, is a challenge that we all will face in our architecture and urbanism practice, that I think I hope you all, as students and as you go into practice, will think about as well.
I think what I would offer is no different than what I tell my students over at Mendoza about real estate development. Architecture as a field has many different facets, just as real estate development does. And as students, you need to find a passion in some aspect of what architecture is all about and how architecture contributes to the overall built environment. And once you find that passion, that will help lead you and direct you in a particular path. But whatever passion you have, architecture, in not necessarily every, but in most instances, is tied to some form of a market reality. And the market reality can be this neighborhood, or the kind of housing that Dan was talking about, or the kind of developments and places that we try to create. You can't take architectural talent and ignore. You have to apply it to a market reality.
I think what's interesting is the spectrum that was presented today. And for the students, whether you're an architecture student, business student, law, or any other discipline, it I think shows the richness of the world you will inherit in terms of what you might decide to do. Sometimes you will find that you are good at something you had no idea about. You'll default into something. Everybody here has said it. You didn't imagine yourself as students doing what you're doing today.
So, you know, the work, life is long, the need is great. One of my professors when I was in school once said, in a well-furnished world, you need one of these. So, which means that there's a place for everything. But it also says another thing, which is that to fix all the ills that each generation presents the next one with, there is no one size fits all. When you talk about, at least in the architect, you talk about types. Building types are somehow this rigid format of how you go about designing. But in fact, every building is different. Every city is different. Every city has its unique history, its unique patterns, and you can at one point, at one level, you can generalize. But at the other level, it has to be about that place. I think we saw that today in all the presentations. There are some broad straw principles that everybody agrees on, but then the particular solution is really particular to that.
Calibrating the toolkit.
Yeah.
We saw a lot of toolkit options today, but to be able to take that, the general principle and apply it locally, is something we've all shown really well, and that's something to really pay attention to, is understanding what's a given and what's a variable, and being able to apply that to sales. Let's see, let's do some questions, and I might interject a couple others as we go. Are there questions for the panel?
Well, I have one. I have several questions, actually. I'm wondering which ones. Let me just talk about them for displacement project. We did it. Working in Winter Park many years ago, a black neighborhood. We had to close the meeting, and the black homeowners said, "Hey, we're going to call. We're going to talk about things we're doing. Our grandparents were in Berlin. We shot down the German Air Force. We've been going to really good schools for 2 or 3 generations. Why are we not allowed to sell our properties at a price of depreciation?" And we sort of, like, requested. That was
What was your answer again?
the answer was actually, we cannot help you. We cannot be fair to you. We cannot treat you like white people. Sorry.
Anders, do you have restrictions when they purchase? Do you have restrictions on any resale?
Resale, yeah, we have restrictions. The program itself has a 15-year portability restriction. So if it resells during that time, the new buyer also has to be qualified. But you bring up a really deep question, right? And I think we just can't, we have to come up with a better answer to simplify that and to say what we've tried in the past. Really, I don't think there have been a lot of examples of success in doing this. We've got to come up with more creative answers. And I think that we can, as long as we are willing to kind of give up what we've done in the past. And I think, and what I would see, what I'm starting to really understand in the neighborhood is that if we count on the market itself, then we're not going to come up with the right answer. Because the market, in this case, is not going to reward the family that perhaps has been there for 40 years and probably bought the house for $40,000 and it's still valued $40,000. And they probably still owe 30 on it because they had to repair the roof 2 years ago. You know, and these are real situations that even at these low prices, if their home is upside down on their houses. So in some senses, we as a community need to think about what is the value of social and community investment, which is a very difficult thing. Everything we do is market driven and works on these, you know, like the real estate market is working on this one fine. If it's not, then it's very difficult. I think to reward that family, I think this question coming up, say in the west side of South Bend, is an interesting one, is to say, could it be as simple as combining, say, subsidy for new construction with a targeted area that would also impact adjacent homeowners. And then we have them in one home. There's a lot of complications as to why that might also be difficult. But I would also say it's difficult for me in my position. I like a lot of what I'm doing. One thing I don't like is that I can incentivize a new family moving in, or a family that wanted to move across the neighborhood into my house, but I don't have a lot of tools to help the family next door to it that has been in their home and needs it painted in a new roof. And there are very limited options and tools available for that. The city has a program that allows for some homeowner repair, which you said very quickly, and is very limited when you're talking about, city of 100,000 people. And so I will say that, for me, those are definite frustrations. And I would say one of the things that we, as a society, could think about doing is to say, really, a lot of what is happening to you as a neighbor and homeowner is outside of your own responsibility. You could have been a great homeowner. It's not reflected in the market. So what does it mean for us and what we value as a society? How about that? We'll just change the market, and that's all we need.
But if the market goes up.
Yeah.
The pool is
Yeah.
Well, and there's a reason nobody has solved this, because it's very, very difficult, and it's different in every community. Just to clarify, what you were saying is they were asking you, why shouldn't they, why should they be
why are you bringing in affordable housing? If we brought in good housing, I would be able to sell my lots.
They want to read
Like the same mechanism that other people would have.
Affordable housing versus.
Why should they?
Exactly, it would be more like the edge of your neighborhood. You have a really difficult street.
Yeah.
Are you displacing the people that have lived there for a long time?
And I think that the majority of the places we've worked that are trying to address this have the issue that 80% or more of their properties are rentals. The majority of the people are in rentals, so that if you do something to increase the value of the properties, they're not going to benefit from it.
Exactly.
Right? They're going to get, so there's a lot of value in doing what the CDC near Northwest Neighborhood is doing in planting those people as owners in those neighborhoods before the values go up. Because then they can benefit, and they can either decide to sell and put some money back in their pot to sell to the next person. And that's really the opportunity for home ownership is a really big deal. And a lot of lower income people in the United States have not been given the opportunity to own their homes. So,
but nonetheless, the people who are rental, with the grassroots people will say, why are you?
it's a very, very hard thing.
Right.
I'm glad this issue has come up, because I've been giving a lot of thought to this issue. And I think one of the things that goes down to is quite frankly, the economic structures of ownership that exist within the market opportunity that our society right now are kind of driving us towards. It's all about the single bottom line, and it's about either what I can do to maximize my value as a single family or a single property owner, or it's a corporate owner of a large property, and they're trying to do the same thing. And that just is going to drive the prices off. And not-for-profit is a great way to see neighborhoods, but it's probably good for one generation, because if it really is successful, then I'll like it. Maybe those income supported families that got it first will be able to benefit from it, but then we're right back to where we were, where we started. So I think we need to also begin to think about, this is the market we live in, but are there other ownership structures or other ways we might think about it? For example, older residents on fixed income can be taxed out of their place into the tax station. We can give them tax amnesty that says, while you're in your house, you want to have to pay more taxes than you are currently, but when you sell, if you sell it in advance, then you're going to have to pay a portion of that. So we're not going to price you out, but we will get back if that's the lump sum share. Benefit corporations. Maybe we need to have corporations that own some of our housing that are basically owning it not just for a profit, but the benefit of the community. One of the big concerns I have is the fundamental foundation of democracy is because our ownership of property has a big residential chunk that we own ourselves. But what if the millennials start to move towards a sharing economy, don't want to own houses, Who's gonna do that? Are we gonna take the Walmarts, the McDonald's, and the Alibabas of housing, that will own housing in our communities for the benefit of their stockholders and not for us? That's what slumland are doing to us right now. So can't we create other forms of community ownership or other ways to do it? One way that we do it in Australia is the community there. The community actually owns the land. It sounds weird to us, but the community owns the land. You get a rent for it for 99 years for $1. And then the price of the housing is largely dependent on, how the cost of the actual building goes. So there's some different mechanisms. So I think we need to add some of these new tools that aren't even the kind of thing about design here, so that we can have some portion, not all, we need most of it market control. We can have some portion of our housing be owned and controlled for the benefit of our communities through some of these other ownership structures, in addition to the other ones.
I thought the 99 year was the medieval.
The other thing I want to say that supplement what I said is that by home ownership, I don't mean only single family home ownership. Is like it is actually really, really hard, very risky to deliver condos, stacked units in a lot of places. And it's hard sometimes to finance a purchase for a condo. And so I think there's more creative ways in terms of and co-housing that need to be considered and should be considered. So I guess I wanted to correct that. I'm not implying that single family home ownership is the solution. I think it's part of the solution is that being able to have households build equity in a property, whether it be a cottage core or fourplex or a sixplex mansion apartment, just
Thanks so much for everyone presenting, and Kathy, I think that you're doing amazing work that is underrepresented amongst like higher academics, which is wonderful. My question is concerning kind of motivating political structures in a way with these ideas, again, wonderful ideas that you had, and also all of you really. How do you motivate a political structure like a local economy to kind of take up these ideas that you have? Because we see in places like the city I come from, Charleston, we see lip service gets paid to, oh, affordable housing, urbanism, this, that, and the third. But then in reality, you see a wetting of the tourist dollar. So it's not a concern for the people there, it's for the transients, the people, the tourists that are coming in. So how do you motivate a political economy to actually take this up, even though it might not be paying dividends? You see that they actually rarely run the local economy for the people in it. Rather, we're seeing boutique hotels and things of that nature instead of like actual affordable housing for people like us coming out of school or maybe young families.
Well, I think it's, if you're hearing from everybody that this whole issue of housing for the poor, affordable housing, in some cases middle housing, is challenging. And from the private developers' point of view, at least from our company's kind of guidelines or mission statement, I think you need to get the whole community involved, because the market does provide enough profit and enough volume that more of this problem can be addressed. And sometimes I think developers are looked at as somebody that's always trying to maximize the bottom line. I can tell you that that's not the case. There's many of us that would sacrifice dollars to do the right thing. And a stronger Denver in all respects, housing wise, is a better market for me. And I think that if you can politically raise the issue, I think you would get great support from the development community, from the home building community, to try to create public, quasi-public structures to participate in this problem. it's almost taking the easy way out when someone says, well, just put $200,000 into an affordable housing account. Well, that money just gets, because there's no real program, there's no real use that money just gets, I don't actually know what. No, seriously, I don't know what happens to it, but it's just like closing our eyes to the problem. Right? We have to raise the awareness.
The bad news is every city, regardless of size, is dealing with housing issues right now. The good news is that's forcing them to think creatively and to start to support creative tools to address those housing issues, because cities, so the town I grew up in Nebraska is 20,000 people. It's been 20,000 people since I grew up here. It's mostly like an industrial supported economy. Is the housing problem starting to impact their local economy? So their economic development director has made it a priority to deal with the housing issue, because it's impacting, and that's happening all over the United States. And so it's almost being forced, but in a good way that they're having, cities are having creative, states are having dealing with this housing issue.
This is just a small part of the problem, but like in Denver, condos are just out of the question. Nobody will build condos. And it's simply because we're such a litigious society, and the construction defect laws that we have in place in Colorado are just insane. You have members of the legal profession, chasing homeowners associations to bring suit against the builders over so-called defects, when the reality and the numbers are looked at, the attorneys are taking a third of the take. Very little, if any, of the money is spent on the so-called defects, and the HOA is just building a stockpile of cash. It's a broken system, and the cost of insurance, if you go to build condos with that type of environment, I mean, people have to video all aspects of their construction. When they put up a piece of sheetrock, they have to show the vapor barrier and the insulation and so on. They have to show how they've sealed the joints. People just stop building them. And that is a mixed or multifamily is a vehicle that can get more towards the level of housing, just like you're trying to do in your neighborhood. Instead of trying to build 6 houses, if you can build a 6-plex, you're filling a bigger hole.
I have a question about what architecture in particular contributes to a really diverse conversation, because there's multiple stakeholders here: developers, political entities, municipalities, social entities, in terms of communities, and they all have different languages and different ways of assessing what's going on. I'd be interested, particularly here from the architects, what can architecture or architects contribute to building a productive conversation among such diverse stakeholders?
Maybe I'll take a crack at it. I think clarity of thought about how cities, towns, villages, hamlets, etc. There's no right way to. There's no right solution. There's many solutions, but there's a lot of wrong solutions. What we see is that the people who shape cities in antiquity, by antiquity I mean anything before the Second World War, there was a clarity of thought for what a city was, what a town was, what a hamlet was, what a campus was. The people who are making decisions, the executives, presidents of corporations, presidents of universities, they have no idea when they get a $200 million gift for a research center, how to put it together, for a city. And architects can give that clarity on where you put it, how you break up the massing, how you integrate it into the city, so that it doesn't become the eyesore that brought some tax dollars into the city, but rather it has lasting value. We had not to get too political here, but we had an interesting intervention in South Bend proposed earlier this summer. A huge building, all residential, was going to bring in tax dollars. It was going to bring in a grocery store downtown. Everybody wants a grocery store downtown. Like mom and have to buy. Find it, right? But it would have been an eyesore. The thing had gone belly up. The building would have been there for a long, long time. And it would have set the city back, at least 100 years. That was my opinion. I was very vocal about it. If the developer had actually done the work that was required to get the kind of density that they needed, they could have actually gotten a better building. They would have had an amenity for the city, and it would have made it money. But it requires a little bit more thinking. It requires to know how cities are made. And if that particular design, an architect we had come up with, because they brought in architects from all over the country, actually. They told them all the same thing. Building is too big, it's an eyesore, it's nothing like it. There was no business merit, there was no architectural merit. So those are the kinds of things that I think architects can do. Now, taking it out of that, looking at, say, a university center, you can look at any figure ground or aerial map of the university, and you can spot exactly the moment in which things started to go wrong. And if architects had an education, because there were architects involved in this thing, if architects had an education that included old knowledge plus new knowledge, I think those kinds of problems wouldn't have been so big. But part of it's our culture. We have forgotten, we have so embraced new knowledge that we forgot all the knowledge that has brought us to the point where everything was good about life. That streets were places where people's lives unfolded. They were born in a place, they were educated in a place, they fell in love in a place, there was families in a place. But it was about place. And with all the new beautiful things that we've invented since the Second World War, abilities and technology, we need to kind of tie that all back to what the purpose of life is for everybody. No matter what part of the income spectrum you're in, you still want to have a control of it. And we've forgotten how to put all that together. So I don't know if architects have a monopoly on knowing that. But I think that the dialogue between old knowledge and new knowledge, between business leaders, the legal professions, the scientists, the physicists, the biologists, the healthcare people, everybody's got to get into this discussion. But architects can help say how do you make it.
The architect is by nature a generalist. If you're designing a school, you have to be an expert in how people learn. If you're designing a hospital, you have to know how the needs of the doctor, the needs of the patients, and all of the constituents. So you actually are, by nature, really well positioned to be a thought leader and somebody that can pull everyone together, because by the nature of how you learn and what you're learning, you have to learn everything. Where we fall down as architects is we stay in our style and we make it only about the design, and everything else is there for someone else to figure out. So someone else has to figure out how to make it buildable. Somebody else has to figure out it. In fact, I was joking earlier, and it's kind of a joke ahead. Not my favorite line in detail by others on my construction drawings. It goes over there, and I can tell you that explain why they should. And so I'm really good at this. I'm just as guilty at sort of putting all of that on someone else. And we can't do that. You have to participate. You have to be real about what you're building and how you're building it, and you have to understand the numbers of it. Make friends with people over at Mendoza. Make friends with the people in the law school. These will be your best friends. You need that. We have Mark White, one of our advisory council board members. He makes a really good point. Don't start your architecture firm by being a partner with another architect. Like, why would you do that? Be partners with the builder. Be partners with the developer. We go off in our little corner and then we make ourselves irrelevant, so no one calls us. When the building is too expensive, you're just a dumb architect that drew the drawing that's too expensive, and they don't call you back. When actually you're the one that could help them create value, not just cost. And you could show them how, this line on the paper doesn't matter, so let's get rid of that material, but this one does matter. And the problem is we've made ourselves irrelevant as an industry, and we don't get the call to help. And so your job is to show that you're more than just drawing artwork, but you can actually speak to and understand the numbers and the policy and the construction and everything else to allow you to be called. I think no one needs to call the architect, because the architect is the problem. You actually need to see
Well,
the solution.
the AIA, like, the AIA actively promote community that architects should be developers.
I'm not a member of the AA.
They don't prohibit it with the.
No, so the AIA is not part of the solution.
But the best developments result from having a collaboration between a city that cares, a developer that cares, an architect that understands and cares. You can get to good solutions. There's no one person in the process that can make it all happen. I mean, in the city of Lakewood, our Belmar, our development, it is really something we'll be proud of forever. I mean, we created a 23-block downtown. In each of the blocks, each of the buildings is individually designed. The more doors on the block, the more buildings, the more interesting the street, the scale, the size of the sidewalks, the size of the street scale. But we had to have architectural and land planning guidance. We had to have a city that was open to creating a process that would get us outside the boxes of the zoning. So I don't think it's any one element. It's getting educated people that learn and have a passion for different pieces of this, and then creating those teams together.
Dennis, it's a really excellent question, and as I started jotting down some points to answer it, I could go on for a really long time about the value and benefit of architects sort of being integrated into this conversation, what role they can play. And I think the first one relates to communication, and I think it's the ability to, number one, clear graphic communication. And you might wonder as a student why you're being asked to do this analytique of this ionic order. How does this relate to practice? And just the very basic premise is it's about being able to decide what's the most important information, what should be largest, what are the other supporting information I need, and you'll use that skill set whether you're doing a master plan for urban revitalization for a downtown or a single individual building in terms of presenting it to a client, presenting it to a community, and getting buy-in. And I think there's also verbal communication. And I think the big reason the missing middle concept has gone on the way it has is because it's given communities a different way to talk about housing choices and the need for housing choice without using the scary technical terms that we as architects and developers and planners like to use. That makes it more approachable. And I think there's also the architect's role, especially as people are being trained in the value of the place. discussing and sort of adding into the conversation going in place, because as we go into communities and they're wondering like, well, why would anybody want to live in that substandard house that's 100 years old in downtown, whether it be a small town or a big town? You say, well, it's because there's no downtown there. That sort of enables them to trade off sort of living in that 4-bedroom, 5-car garage house for that smaller, more compact house with those amenities. And I think just as a starting point, those are two really good elements and aspects and roles that architects can play in this conversation. And I think there's a ton more. And I think this panel is representative of the fact that you can choose different paths in your profession and play a really important role in this conversation.
I'll add just personal experience, if I may, because I would agree, and I always a great question. That it's something that you don't even realize is happening to you when you're learning about becoming an architect. Is that you're becoming a great communicator, verbally and graphically. You're learning how to take criticism for your ideas and vision, and you're learning how to have a vision and an opinion as this happens along the way. So Dean Laputa started with saying that architecture is involved with how we build and how we live together, and I think that those are exactly what are the skills when you're talking about citywide development or neighborhood development or development. You also have to pair with a developer, because your vision might not get anywhere if you can't figure out how to get capital to do it and pair up those ideas. But I wanted to mention just a personal experience. I'm finding as a leader now of a community development corporation that I'm using my skills in a very different type of architecture. And the social architecture includes things like what happens when you have suddenly gigantically better understood lead problem in your community. You find out that 30% of the kids in your area have elevated lead blood levels. And you're saying we have to respond to that. Next thing I know, I am the convener of a lead affinity group that's pulling together the health department and pulling together university partners and pulling together all these stakeholders. All of them give me enough respect because I'm a pretty decent convener. And it's because I have some community voice, and so that's appreciated. But it's also appreciated that I can listen while I hold my own opinion, and that I can listen and shape conversation and help others shape that conversation, even amongst emotions, even amongst agendas, and to say, really, but at the end of the day, aren't we trying to get here in our own living together in this built environment? And I can continue to have that role, and I think that all of us have that leadership capability that comes through this study, whether it's talked about or not.
I think, hold that question. I want a student question.
So one thing that kind of ties a lot of these ideas together is whenever I go back home to Kentucky and I started driving through like different downtowns like that, even my hometown of Lexington, which is a pretty decent sized city, I've noticed that a lot of dual purpose buildings, especially mom and pop shops, very common thing, but you see that the residential part has been taken out and is no longer in use. And I'm just wondering if there's if you all think it'd be possible to revitalize these buildings, reinstitute the residential portion of them in a way that's more like revitalization, similar to your Northwestern project, rather than just simple gentrification and negatively affecting everything around them.
Yeah, I can talk about that specifically, and I'd be curious other opinions on learning what the limitations right now of even creating new opportunities for that. We actually don't have a lot of that in the New Northwest. And I think what has often happened is mom and pop moved out to the suburbs and kept their shop, or it's painted on as somebody who didn't want to live in building, maybe rented it out for a while, use this as a city office, and that sort of thing. I think that they can be immensely useful typologies for what's going on. In particular, the corridor I mentioned through our neighborhood, Portage Avenue, you saw the picture of our building on it, and it's a mixed-use building. There's 5 apartments upstairs, all upstairs, and it has 2 community spaces, offices, and a small coffee shop on the ground floor. And it works great. There are times where the noise impacts both directions, and I would say, that's probably the biggest limitation, maybe parking and other. But it is a vital happening urban place. And I think that we as citizens, as how we're understanding those places, are responding to that more and more. South Bend now has a maker studio. They're not involved in housing at all, but I think these kinds of maker spaces, these live work situations need to be created. Mike's creating one right now, just a few blocks away from Friends. I think there's more and more interest, and maybe some of the limitations at this point simply might be offering those spaces in a manner that the person going into it doesn't have to invest the capital to have it. A lot of times, and we find this with homeowners too, is that there are a lot of homeowners that don't want to do it yourself. They want to be ready for move-in and use, and so it may take others investing capital to get ready. Person actually wants to use it.
Yeah, based on our experience and taking a look at this in the cities up and down California and across the country is usually just to get those upper floors to up to building code and accessibility standards, you're gonna have to spend a couple $100,000. And when your rents or your sales prices are not, you're gonna have a gap that they have in the renovation of these houses, and it's a really big issue. Some communities have adopted building codes that relate to historic buildings that make it easier to do. And I think it's a necessity for us to figure this out because it is that incremental type of investment and development that plants the seeds for revitalization of these neighborhoods. I remember working for the city of Cincinnati over the course of 4 years. And if you're familiar with the Over the Rain neighborhood, which is just north of the downtown, beautiful historic collection of historic buildings. I think 10 years ago was the most dangerous spot in the city. Like every 3 or 4 months when I would visit the city for the project, I saw like one more shop front filled with somebody making and selling shoes, or like a yoga studio, or like just really creative things. And I think there is this resurgence of the maker culture, and I think we need to figure out a way to enable that in ways that we haven't, because every time I think about this, even in the politics, we talk about Main Street and Wall Street. Well, we're not building Main Street anymore. So what happens when Main Street is full, or when people are looking for Main Street and they can't find it? So it's an interesting challenge that you guys will take on and still continue to try to resolve, I'm sure, when you start working professionally.
One of the things that we've seen in more blighted or older areas of communities in Denver, and I'll use the Arts District out in LA, which is, the Arts District is literally a block away from the largest homeless population that I've ever seen in my life. It's terrifying. And yes, there were some people living in the Arts District in revamped and renovated buildings and lofts. What changed the face of the Arts District was 2 or 3 restaurants. Restaurants can change the feel and the traffic that comes to an area almost like on any other use. I mean, if you look at downtown South Bend, the Sail Grill, Cafe de Bar, and 2 or 3 others. You get restaurants going there, and all of a sudden
With tables, right?
I think
With tables in the sidewalk.
well, depending on the climate that you're living. I cover research, so I don't. But restaurants can really catalyze like a few other things. And then you get people wanting to, you've got wait staff there, you've got people that want to live close by. And I think there's good examples of that all over the country.
And that leads to gentrification?
Yeah, it does.
The problem you all have ultimately is that as the economy grows, the distribution between the poor and the rich grows wider and wider and wider. As much as we may want to try and solve it through housing, we have to have many solutions.
One of the solutions comes up with the missing middle housing conversation is saying that we're talking about smaller developments, you're gonna have a more organic situation, which allows for lots of possibilities and potentialities. I don't know if you're seeing that. I also wanted to ask you, Dan, what kind of ownership structures you're seeing in the duplex, duplexes, fourplexes?
Yeah. Before I answer that, I'm realizing as I'm thinking about this discussion is the first thing that we've seen happen in cities before new construction happened is builders, smart builders, buying the historic examples of the revitalization, because it's only at that point that new construction will actually pencil out. And I did mention that our client in Omaha made a really smart investment 10 years ago in Midtown Omaha, where he bought 300 units of beautiful old historic missing middle buildings. Within 5-minute walk of $100 million investment, which Omaha was making in a mixed-use center. And needless to say, he did really well. And he's getting the highest per square foot rent, so it doesn't help the gentrification conversation, but he's then moved on to other things. Rules like ownership structures. I always get asked the question about like ownership or rental usually, and every community is different depending on like where the market's at and what makes the most sense. But I think that we're seeing a lot of desire to sort of shift toward this co-housing model, where it's actually a formal shared community. Co-op, I guess, is fairly similar, whether it be a cottage or a fourplex building where there's actually they share daycare, they share dinners at least a couple times a week. There's just a lot of, as we've all moved across the country and our parents and the grandparents are spread throughout it, there's just a real need for that sense of community. And we're seeing a lot of demand and desire to have that. There's just a lot of hurdles, and zoning is a big one in a lot of places to make that. I think there's a huge housing, whether it be formally structured or just anytime. So whenever I go to a conference, I'm usually doing a missing middle tour. We've done it all across the country, and we'll inevitably, when we're out touring these places and we're peeking into a bungalow court, somebody will come out and say, "Well, what are you doing?" They're kind of concerned. They're sort of informally protecting and being the security of the community, but it becomes really obvious after we hear or calm their fears of us staking their house or their houses, that they're really passionate about the place they live in, and they want to talk about it for a really long time. It's like, oh, sorry, at some point we gotta move on with our tour. So there tends to be a really strong sense of community within individual buildings, as well as what I see as the broader neighborhood like you talk about. Now I can talk about if you did a block party ratio for neighborhoods with missing middle versus neighborhoods without it, and the neighborhoods with the missing middle probably have more block parties than neighborhoods. So
This doesn't really respond to a direct question, but it's just something that popped into my mind that at least meaningful to me. One of the things that I've always loved and has drawn me to Notre Dame is the moral compass that the people that work here, people that go to school here, are given and take with them in their life. And the very fact that we're having the kind of conversations that we're having today, I think it's evident by the number of people here, how many people genuinely care. At the same time, I am also a great believer that the market is capable of solving some of these problems. Two things have to happen. If you make the market very, very successful, Okay, just as Mutual of Omaha deliberately invested in a particular area, because that was going to anchor and spur, just as Notre Dame spurred Eddy Street Commons and so on. If the market does well, and then you have folks like you raising awareness and getting other bodies involved, getting the city involved, getting the state involved, getting the counties involved, the market can be a big part of the solution. So we should be cheering for the market to do well, but doing so with a moral compass and moral awareness that we've got a responsibility to solve these other problems when we do well. It's called giving back.
So we are now just about out of time. I keep ignoring you and ignoring Jeffrey. So we're going to be setting in commission with you. Both of you ask the questions before anyone answers. And then we're going to do those answers in our final remarks. And that's where we're going to get out of here on time. Very quickly.
Well, first thought, as an educator, I want to know what you wish you had learned when you were in school that would have been helpful doing the things that you're doing.
Excellent. That's good. Jeffrey?
I think I'll keep it.
All right. All right. So that's perfect for final remarks down the road. Yeah, there you go.
Well, so we covered a lot of territory today. I think my takeaways are several. I like the term patience capital. And I like particularly the word patience because it takes a long time to affect any change. Some places flip overnight. But generally speaking, for all the issues that we're talking about today, changes can come incrementally. And then that eventually will be a tipping point. 10 years ago, who would have thought Detroit would have been an attractive place? Now, half of Brooklyn is moving there. Like the Detroiters don't want big billboards, Brooklyn State. So, okay, that should be a problem. But it derives from the point that patience is probably the biggest piece of this that anyone can have. And our instant gratification culture, that's a tough sell. That's actually, life is long, lots of love things to do, it's unpredictable. For students in the room, I think you should take, instead of it being confusing and scary, I think you need to embrace it. Because that the open-endedness of life is really what gives hope to communities that are blighted, communities that are challenged, and to places that just want to make themselves better. We had a speaker last year, who talked about the importance of committing to a place that Chicago shouldn't try to be, for instance, like London or Indianapolis shouldn't try to be quote unquote world-class city. It should just be the best place for the people who live in Indianapolis to be. And so understanding that there are so many places that we can live out our lives. Our success as humans is not to just all end up in New York or London or Los Angeles. Actually to find a place that actually that expresses what we want to do and what we can find fertile ground to complete our life's work. The other takeaway I have is the importance of communication, the skills that you are acquiring as students. And then if I just embarrass you a little bit, your communication skills graphically, architecturally, verbally have been extraordinary. And I looked at your presentation and how the clarity of the graphics, but also the specificity of the graphics. Like the last slide was the middle or the middle. But the buildings that you were showing were all very clear diagrams of what you were saying. The background was one side of the middle, and the foreground was the other side. That was very And in your form-based code efforts, that clarity is essential. It's important to be clear. And I think as students, your objective is to not just be good in design, but to be clear. And remember, the design doesn't stop with the building, it's the whole presentation, it's the borders, it's the lettering, it's the entire package that you're presenting.
I think when I look back growing up in Syracuse and living in a modest middle-class family, I never dreamed very big. I was never encouraged to dream big or to think I could do great things or teach a class at Notre Dame. I mean, my goals were literally to earn $50,000 a year and to own a house. I thought that would be like the end of the world. And that's about as deep as my thinking got. So I would say I don't think today's generation necessarily has that same problem with believing that they can dream big and do big things. The thing that I would caution students about today is to avoid all aspects of feeling entitled. Because there's part of your generation that is that way, and there's a perception of your generation that you all feel that way. Neither are true. But personally, if I could teach, and do try to teach my young children a lesson, is you're not entitled. There's a lot of hard work and effort that's gone into getting you where you are, and your life's work is just beginning.
Thank you. My reflection as far as what I wish I could have changed as an undergrad, even for myself, would have, on an academic way, I realized that one of the most powerful things as a practicing architect and as a community member is to see how your work impacts others and how others live in your work. For example, I worked in the Potawatomi Band Shell at Potawatomi Park, and to see that on the first night of the concert, it was, so it's very powerful to see how what you imagined something to be used as is used, whether it's a house or anything. And I don't know, maybe that's an exercise even that you could do in a small way on campus, is to design something and see how people interact with it. It's very powerful. And I would say on a personal level, this is something that I wouldn't ask in the school of architecture, but I should have asked it myself, is that I was pretty unaware of the wider campus when it came to cross-disciplinary things. In fact, like the Center for Social Concerns has only grown, and I can see even now in the work that I'm doing now, I would have loved to spend a lot more time there, maybe do summer service learning projects, finding out more about my place in the world and social justice issues. But I just didn't have a big enough imagination for it, frankly. And kind of what I do, I was steeped into the architecture program, which was wonderful, but I was also in marching band and doing work study and, hanging out at Lions Hall and doing those things. And so those were all great things, but I wish instead somebody at home was like, hey, you would enjoy going over, and maybe you should also be talking to law students, and maybe you should also be talking to people. So the fact that we're having a conversation is very interesting that does that. I think it's immensely important to think about how this fits into a life.
I think the message, or what I wish I would have learned, is that there are many paths to take professionally to have an impact. And I think that's what's exciting about this conversation today, introduction of the Real Estate Institute, and just more diverse conversations that are happening here. Sort of start to emphasize to professional success or having embarrass Michael, no. So I remember in our 4th year, when Michael took us to Madison, and it was the first time that I realized that urban design was what I was really passionate about. Because up until then, it was about the architecture of the building, and when he had us out there documenting building types and the street sections and looking at the entire city, like I still remember, I realized like that was where when I realized I wanted to design. So there's just a lot of opportunities to sort of find those different paths. And I think the second thing is, I can still remember, I see Duncan's workings. I still remember second semester freshman year walking into his theory class, and he was drawing an ionic capital on the chalkboard. And here I am as a freshman, like, I didn't even know what architecture really was, trying to figure out like, how does this translate? Why does this matter? And I think there would be a lot of value in this conversation of how do you translate the values and the skill set that you're learning here in this classical program to the real world. Whether you choose to work for a nonprofit or for a design firm or an architecture firm as you go through the program. Because like I said, even that analytique, like that skill set, even as crazy as you think it is as a student, that skill set translates to a really effective skill set that you can use regardless of which.
Don't be my short. It's basically, I was just saying the same thing. Trust the process and worry less. All the lessons that I need. I want to really sincerely thank you guys for coming here. The conversation that we've had has been amazing, and I think it elevates everything we're doing at the school and at the university. I want to thank Dan Kelly from Boston as we're embarking in this institute and busting through the silos. Thank you all for hanging in there with us through this. It's fantastic to see you.
I make one comment. I was sitting here 50 years ago, and was in the second class going to Rome. And for those sitting next to me that are going to Rome next year, I would tell you that I just moved into a new house, and I threw away all the binders and slides that I took with my 35mm camera that weighed about 7 pounds. When you go there, sketch your arms off. Draw a lot. It's not all about the monuments. It's about the streetscapes and understanding the sense of place. You will never have a better laboratory for that than going to Europe. But sketch, 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 because those become indelible in your mind. The slides are worthless. They have to be worthless. But my sketches are the most valuable things I could do. So if you're going to Rome, sketch a lot. Don't be afraid to do it. These are bad sketches in your mind.
For everyone who doesn't know, Mark Cover is he's an institution here. He's involved with Mendoza, as we said, 50 years from graduated from the School of Architecture. So thank you for today. So thank you, everybody. It's been wonderful. Yeah.